Hello, I am Farah Guerrero, and this is the Blue Hour on CITR 101.9 FM at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that CITR broadcasts from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. This interview was pre-recorded in Whistler on the shared, unceded territories of the Squamish and Lillooet nations. Today's program is the first in a two-part series exploring rock climbing, physical activity, and psychological well-being. The idea for this series grew out of personal curiosity. I began rock climbing last year with my older son at the age of 48, and it profoundly changed the way I understood sport and my own relationship with the mountains, something I have always been passionate about. What was extraordinary about discovering climbing at this stage of my life was realizing that it was not too late to begin. It's a sport that I can imagine continuing for another couple of decades, perhaps longer. Climbing can also be remarkably adaptable. People of many different ages, abilities, and backgrounds can find their own way into it. I wanted to understand this experience from the perspective of scientific research. What happens cognitively, psychologically, and socially when someone begins climbing? How do confidence, identity, and belonging influence whether we become physically active? And how might climbing contribute not only to physical health, but also to our overall mental and emotional well-being? My guest for part one is Sophie Alexander, a master's student in kinesiology at the University of Victoria, whose research explores the relationship between climbing, physical activity, and identity development. Her current project, titled From Doing to Being, a Mixed Methods Exploration of Developing a Rock Climber Identity, asks how a socially supported introduction to climbing might help physically inactive emerging adults develop a sense of themselves as climbers and become more engaged with physical activity. At the heart of her work is a deceptively simple question. If climbing can transform people's lives, how do we help them take that first step into the community so that they can experience its benefits? Sophie's interest in this subject developed through her own journey into climbing. Although she was initially afraid of heights, she began working at the Calgary Climbing Centre as a teenager. There she discovered climbing as a pathway toward personal growth, mentorship, and community connection. She later coached at BoulderHouse in Victoria, supporting climbers of different ages and backgrounds, including youth and older adults. Before beginning her master's research, Sophie completed an honors thesis in social and personality psychology at Carleton University, where she examined the potential mental health benefits of bouldering psychotherapy in comparison with traditional cognitive behavioral therapy. She has also worked with cancer survivors through a fitness internship in Belgium and contributed to rehabilitation medicine research at Island Health in Victoria. In our conversation, Sophie and I discuss the physical, psychological, and social dimensions of climbing, the importance of confidence, mentorship, and belonging, and the gradual process through which someone begins not only to climb, but to think of themselves as a climber. Next week, in part two of the series, my guest will be Dr. Patrick Boudreau, a postdoctoral fellow at Concordia University and a behavioral medicine researcher with a background in health and exercise psychology. We will continue exploring climbing and physical activity, with particular attention to psychological well-being and the experience of exercising in natural environments. But today, we begin with the process of becoming a climber. Welcome, Sophie, to the Blue Hour.
Hi.
So I would like to begin speaking about your article, Climbers' Insight on the Health Benefits of Their Sport, combining photo voice and confessional tale genres. This was recently published last year. And now at the beginning of your article, you write that despite the growing interest in rock climbing research, little is known about its health benefits from the perspective of rock climbers themselves. And that seems to be a very central starting point of the paper. So you're, instead of looking necessarily at clinical measurements or researchers' assumptions about what climbing might offer, you asked climbers themselves to describe what the sport means in their lives. And so why was it important to begin with the climbers' own perspectives, and what did their personal accounts allow you to see that more conventional research might overlook?
I think the reason that I wanted to look at the perspective of climbers themselves is because I wanted to know why climbing was so beneficial for people's health. There's a lot of clinical research out there that I was analyzing in my undergrad, comparing the benefits of rock climbing with cognitive behavioral therapy. And I wanted to know why it was so successful for people. And I wanted to talk to people who I knew in the climbing community, as I've had discussions about the benefits of climbing with people that I know in the climbing community. And I thought that they would be able to share some valuable insights from their own personal experience.
And so you wanted to, the personal anecdote, sort of that relationship with the rock, if we might say, was really important to you because it's also drawing from something you call the confessional tale, which is really, was very interesting to me because as I said to you earlier before we went on air, that I've never seen this before in academic research. But it really is the researcher's personal voice. So can you tell me what you mean by the confessional tale and why bringing your personal voice, even as the lead researcher of this paper, was so important?
So, confessional tale is a qualitative research method, and it's used to enhance something called reflexivity, which is the idea that research is inherently subjective. So, as much as you can try to be objective in research, there's a person behind the paper. And I think it's really important to know what the reasoning behind creating the paper is and potential biases that were present while making the paper so that people who are consuming the literature are able to critique it and figure out the best way to use it in their own practice or in their own life.
Yes, so for you, this was taking in something that climbing, even as a subject of research, is really actually central to your life. And so bringing that in was very interesting because you, in your paper, you actually start off by actually talking about what you experienced in the final year of your undergraduate study. So I'm hoping, Sophie, that you would like, if you could share that with us and explain, in the best way you can about how your own personal journey with rock climbing not only brought you to perhaps what you're studying today and certainly what your master's thesis is on, but in this paper, you actually intertwine it in the paper itself.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people really struggled with their mental health in undergrad, specifically following the COVID-19 pandemic. But for me, I found that the climbing community was a place where I was really able to lean on and found people who were like very similar to me. But I think the thing about the climbing itself is it helps you overcome challenges. There's research showing that it can help you with something called neuroplasticity, which is like making changes in your brain. It can also help with executive functioning, which is something that people who are like perhaps depressed or have ADHD, they tend to struggle with executive functioning. But climbing through like problem solving and having to focus so that you don't fall and hurt yourself, it helps train your brain to be able to overcome difficulties.
And so you have all of this research, but then you have yourself. And so do you mind, do you feel comfortable telling us what you experienced in that undergraduate year and how
Yeah.
climbing really shifted your life and actually helped you in so many ways deal with challenges that maybe you could never have imagined?
Yeah. So in my first year of university, I was taking psychology and I learned about this thing called ADHD. And I was like, oh, this kind of sounds like something that I struggle with. So I went to get diagnosed. And then I started taking medication for it. But I found the medication made me feel very anxious. And I found that being able to climb was something that helped me feel more like myself. And I felt more focused and free rather than worrying about what was going to happen, worrying about my grades. And I've been able to kind of recover academically. Like in high school, I didn't always do the best with like grades. I worked really hard, but I didn't achieve what I would have liked to have achieved. But once I got into climbing and maybe I kind of knew where my struggles were coming from, I was able to succeed more academically. And I also think that finding something that I was really passionate about definitely helped with that.
Yeah, so can you just break it down for us? So imagine there are people listening that may have never climbed, and now it's important to distinguish the type of climbing. There are many kinds. One of the most popular forms, especially in cities in Canada, because we do have cold weather and our climbing season can be short, where indoor climbing or bouldering is a big part of that. And then, of course, there's the outdoor climbing, which could be sport climbing as well as even outdoor bouldering. Can you break it down to us? So what actually happened? When did you start to notice that climbing became a way of dealing with stresses, anxiety, the kinds of things that you were facing as an undergraduate student?
Mm-hmm.
And when did you feel that you were even able to get off medication and actually find that rock climbing was in some ways nurturing what you really needed?
Yeah, I think when I first started working at a climbing gym and trying rock climbing, I was really scared of heights. So I found it to be quite challenging. But I think doing something that you're scared of and proving to yourself that you can do it is really helpful. I definitely noticed it was helping with my anxiety levels. I think towards the end of my undergraduate degree, I would climb a lot in the evenings and I was able to make a lot of friends. My family climbs, so I'm pretty lucky that I'm able to do that with my sister and with my mom. And I also think once I started integrating it more into my academic life, that's when I also started to be able to have like more of the researcher mind set when analyzing my own climbing behavior. And um, yeah, towards the end of my undergrad, starting my master's is when I really started to realize how important it was to me and was kind of able to pass that on to other people that I met, whether it was like coaching competitive climbing or instructing new climbers of all different ages. I found it was something that I was able to build rapport with all different people in the climbing community.
And this goes back to this concept of confessional tale. So you, in this paper, you have a whole section about this idea that your experiences not only enabled you to understand the research that you were, embarking upon, and certainly many of the theorists and researchers that you quote, but also you were able to understand the participants in your research and their perspectives, because in many ways some of them were mirroring some of your own experiences. So let's talk a little bit now about this qualitative research that you've embarked on in this paper. So that's also a distinguisher. So this is nine climbers that you interviewed over Zoom and used different techniques, and we're going to get into photo voice, which I want to talk actually quite a bit about in a second. But could you just set up sort of how you embarked on this, what kinds of things you did, and how you were able to get these people,
Yes.
speak about their experiences, and then we'll talk about how you actually extracted the data.
So I grew up in Calgary, but I moved to Victoria to do my master's, and I was part of an outdoor climbing group chat on Instagram. So I posted a message on there to see like if anyone was interested, but I also wanted to do an in-person group. So I formatted a small in-person group through BoulderHouse Victoria, and I was able to compare because I wanted to see if people were able to build stronger connections and talk more openly in a Zoom setting versus an in-person setting. And also the people who I was talking with, like from Calgary, I had known longer. So I was curious to see if like the dynamic that they had with me changed the possible outcomes, because the in-person group was people that I had just recently met that year. So they didn't have as long-standing history with me.
Mm-hmm. And so so you've set up, you've got now participants that are willing, and how do you go about imagining this, that you're going to be collecting data? Because in the end, this is the qualitative research that you've embarked upon. So you are, it's the idea that, and you quote someone named Gupta, who says this assertion that the personal anecdote holds some sort of scientific value, especially when exploring under-researched topics or emerging methodologies, which is definitely what you are approaching in this paper. And it can explain, this kind of evidence can explain phenomena in ways that statistical research may overlook. So I'm curious about how you were able to dive into these participants and how you were able to extract that information from them for your paper.
I think it was trying to give the participants a lot of freedom because they're giving up their time to be able to like do this research with me. And so I told them you should select roughly 5 to 10 pictures that you think capture your experience of climbing and what it means to you. And I didn't give them any limitations other than that question and those amount of pictures. And then I set up a time when everyone was free and they brought the pictures in and we just discussed them. I had some questions lined up for them, but I also gave them a chance to like basically in the in-person group, I let them go in a circle and like talk about each of the pictures they selected and why they selected them. And some people had longer explanations than others. And then I even asked them like to talk about somebody else's picture that spoke to them so that they were able to kind of have that sense of like mutual recognition of what climbing meant to them as a community, not just as an individual.
And this is what you call photo voice. So photo voice in the meeting constructed through images. So it is a qualitative research method allowing participants to select photographs, as you say, and express their motivation for climbing through images as well as words. Now, why was that a technique that you wanted to actually utilize in this research? And where did you find it? I'm curious.
I chose it because I learned about this thing called participatory action research in my master's, which is the idea that research should be guided by the participants themselves and should be something that benefits them, not just the researcher. So this is kind of a way to give the voice to the participants. And also, I think sometimes pictures can show the reader things that you can't express in words alone, or like a feeling that you can't understand without seeing it.
No, absolutely. And it actually, for the listeners to imagine this, I'm holding wow, it's quite a few pages.
Yeah.
This article in my hands, and as you go through it in with the text and with all of the important information that you've collected, you have these photos. And so this is the photo voice. It's bringing a voice to the photos. And what's interesting is that the photos themselves are captivating enough that even if we didn't read the text, right, you could get something from that.
Yes. And when my friends ask me about the paper, I told them it's a bit long. If you don't want to read the whole thing, just go to the discussion, look through the pictures, they'll tell you the whole story. And I also think another thing to note is that the participants themselves were able to reread the entire manuscript before it was published and give feedback to ensure that their thoughts and opinions were accurately portrayed, which is something we usually skip out on in research because the researcher gets to decide what the findings are, what the conclusions are based on their methodology and their introduction. But I allowed the participants to have an opportunity to have a say in what most important findings were in the research.
So it's a special, it some ways feels a little bit like a storybook because it's anecdotal, but the photos tell the story, but as well, you do capture what many of these climbers do say about the photos. Now, it did make me think about someone named Susan Sontag. So this is a woman that I learned about actually when I was doing a graduate course in history. And so she published something called On Photography in 1977. The year that I was born. And broadly speaking, she argues that photographs do more than capture the world, that a photograph selects and frames a reality and therefore influences how that reality is seen and understood. So the power, this is now almost 50 years ago, she was really thinking that photographs really do much more. They are much more complex, even if they're just a second sort of
Yes.
frame, right? And in your photos, you've got these. What I really enjoyed was it's you have the sort of full spectrum of the climbing world. So you have photos of climbers in groups, you have photos of climbers in gyms. Of course, many of their faces have been blacked out. If they were young, you have photos of that you can really see some people are tackling some very serious climbs, multi-pitch, which I want to talk about. And you even have a photo of a girl who's even showing probably some injured fingers, maybe some
Yeah.
blood.
She was
And
climbing in Spain.
yeah, and then there's a photo of a woman who shows that she is persevering despite multiple falls, and it's a photo that's kind of blurred out, so you can see kind of the fall that she has probably taken multiple times because falling, as you know, as a researcher, is a big part of the sport. So it's a really beautiful way, I think, to bring out research. Now, did you see any research that was like this that you had come across where this is um,
Yeah.
something that people are using in academia?
In qualitative research, specifically health research, they use something called photonovella, which is similar.
Okay.
But one thing I wanted to say about pictures is it's not just like a memory, I think it's also meaning making. So in my upcoming master's thesis, we're going to use photo voice again. But part of my hope with it is that the act of taking pictures of climbing and learning to belay and all of those aspects of climbing will help participants kind of build their own identity and build that experience together. And then once they see the pictures and discuss it together, it helps them integrate that sense of identity into their own meaning making.
So like a photo journal in a way.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's really beautiful. And we need to talk about your thesis because your thesis is very interesting. Even its proposed title is very interesting. Why don't we just jump into that very quickly because I think you have you're setting out to do something that I think is really interesting because it's about more than climbing. It's about identity. It's about how a person may even at some point in their life call themselves a climber. So it's not someone that's climbing, but someone that actually is a climber. Tell us about what
So
you're setting out
my
to do.
my master's thesis supervisor, his name is Ryan Rhodes, and he runs the behavioral medicine lab at UVic. And he has this model that he came up with called the multi-process action control model. And one of the ideas of this model is that at the top of behavior, you have identity. It's a reflexive process, so it requires less cognitive thinking processes. So if you're trying to motivate yourself to do something and you're doing a bunch of planning and you're trying to like really force yourself to do something, it's going to be difficult. Versus if something is a part of who you are, it may be more natural and more easy to do. So my goal is I have this research that I've conducted that has shown from the perspective of climbers how beneficial climbing is to their physical, mental, social well-being. But my question now is how do we get more people to experience those benefits? And the fact is that 70% of individuals aren't meeting the current physical activity guidelines. 39% of Canadian youth are not meeting recommended physical activity guidelines of 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity. And it's not just about the physical activity. For me, I think climbing is also the social aspect. It's
Mhm.
also overcoming problems. It's also learning how to regulate your own emotions. And so my goal with this research is to see if we can use social identity as a way to get people to get into the sport.
And so your project is called From Doing to Being. That felt very philosophical to me. Can you unpack just that for
Yeah.
me?
I think I notice a lot of people when they're talking about the gym or when they're talking about health, they're like, I should eat this because it's good for me. I should go to the gym because I can build muscle. I should go to the gym so that I don't gain weight or get sick. But what I think is this idea of like intrinsic motivation, which is when you're doing something because it's pleasurable, because you enjoy it, because you love it. And I think that's why identity is important. Like, I would love it if people said, oh, I'm going through a climbing because I love my friends or because I love being on the rock. I love being outside. rather than like, I should be outside, I should hang out with my friends. It would be
Mhm.
great if it was just something that people inherently enjoyed to do.
Yeah, and that it forms their identity, I think, with time, and certainly there is, maybe we can jump to this. There's this what you call full circle.
Full
Is that?
circle moments. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is a moment where climbers, so seasoned climbers or people that might be like you who've climbed for a long time, where you almost naturally gravitate to the idea that someone is maybe who's just learning to climb, you want to give them some motivation, or you want to share your knowledge. And then there's this term climbing in climbing terminology called beta, which maybe you can define, but it's a real thing because it actually happens a lot where people give each other beta. Maybe you can explain what that
Yeah.
means and
So
explain.
beta is this idea that when you're doing a climb, there's a specific movement or specific way you moved your body to finish the climb. So maybe you get stuck at a move and you keep falling, and then you figure out, okay, I need to put my left foot up first, and then I place my right foot up as I swing, and that's my beta. But I think the interesting thing is that there could be intended beta that the person who created the climb said, well, this is what I want people to do. But you could watch 20 people try the climb, maybe only 10 people do the intended beta, and then the rest do their own beta. They do something unique. And I think even with the full circle moments, you don't have to be an advanced climber or an advanced person in the climbing community to have a full circle moment. You could be a summer camp kid who's climbed maybe only 5 times ever in your life, but you did that climb for the whole week and you now know the beta, and you see someone new coming in, you can say, well, this is how I did it.
Yeah.
And then you're having your own little like way of giving back to the community, even if it's something as small as giving beta to another climber.
But this actually goes to the heart of this idea of the full circle, because it's a continuous sort of transferring knowledge from one to the other, which happens in climbing gyms. It happens in crags, amongst climbers who you may arrive at a crag and you may not know the people next to you, but they've maybe just done the route that you're about to do because they've moved on, and there they are helping you and guiding you. And this is something that is very interesting, I think, from a research perspective, at least in this full circle moment, because it is where you can see that the evolution of the climbing community is not just friendship and camaraderie, but actually people helping one another and teaching one another, even if those people are not even people you know, right?
Yeah. I think that's what's unique about climbing, because you're not necessarily always competing against each other. You're competing against the climb. And I had a participant in my study who was a competition climber, and they mentioned that during the competition, they had a friend who came over, and that person, they were struggling with one of the competition climbs, and the friend came over and was like, this is what I did, this is what you should do. And then he was able to do the climb. And I don't think a lot of sports have that aspect of camaraderie and support in a competitive environment.
And then there are situations, and there are many, especially in the outdoor climbing world, where you cannot climb without a partner.
No.
I mean, and there is, to make a distinguishing, I mean, there is a very famous climber, as we all know, Alex Honnold, who has is a free solo climber. But free climbing is actually part of the sport. Sport climbers are free climbing. However, in the case of a partner, which is in the case of most people, you can't really climb without that partner, and that is an interesting thing that you definitely bring out in your research, because there was even something that was so interesting to me. Just at the very beginning of your paper, you actually say that the idea of belaying. So here, I just want to say this. You're talking about this research process was shaped by both the researchers and participants' voices, supporting, guiding, and sharing the experience, much like the act of belaying. That was so striking because what you did there in that one sentence is you actually show what not only your research paper is doing, because it really is about this idea of belaying is, and maybe you can explain
Yes.
belaying, but
Yes.
you can't, you need a partner, you need that collaboration, you need that
Yes.
sharing, and of course, the big word, trust.
So belaying is the person that manages the rope system so that the other person can climb. So you're basically, if you're top rope belaying, it means the rope is at the top of the climb, and each person is on one end of the rope, and the person who's climbing just gets to climb. The person who's belaying just takes the rope through to keep it tight. If you're lead climbing, you both attach to the same part of the rope, and the rope starts at the bottom of the climb, and then the climber just attaches the rope up as they go. And I think this is where the subjectivity of research comes in to why I wrote this. It's because when I started climbing, I actually enjoyed belaying more than I enjoyed climbing because I found the climbing part to be really difficult. And a lot of the people that I worked with were competition climbers and they were very good. So I first kind of got into the sport by belaying. And I thought it was really cool to just be able to support someone. And like you're kind of climbing with them because you're watching them and you're seeing what they're doing and you're moving the rope with them. So it's like this dynamic motion that you're both experiencing. And I think that's also why I found multi-pitch climbing so intriguing. It's
Mm-hmm.
when you go outside and you're climbing like the face of a mountain, and the goal is to like have two or three people work together to get to the top. And the reason I like that one is because it's a whole shared adventure. You have to plan, okay, where are we going to climb? What equipment do we need to bring? What techniques are we going to use? How are we going to get there? What time are we going to leave? And it's a whole shared experience of like conquering the mountain together.
Yeah, and you have a whole section about that, and of course, some photos to go along with that. But it really is this experience of depending upon someone and knowing that that someone is also depending upon you. Yeah, so really, really beautiful ways of describing climbing in this paper. I think you may, if you could only get this paper out, and I hope with your permission, I can link it to my blog because that's the way people can find it and read it. But I think what you should also talk about as well is something that was really interesting and a surprise to me, that although the climber has creative choices, and you did say that even with something that might even be beta, so a way that someone could imagine climbing could be different with each person, but then there's also this creativity in something that's called route setting. So can you explain that and explain what you highlighted in your paper?
Yeah, so what route setting is somebody has to create the climbs in the gym inside, and actually even outside, somebody has to set up the bolts for people to go climbing outside. So there's somebody behind the climb that has just decided where people should put their hands, where they should put their feet, how they should get to the top. And sometimes people are thinking also about safety, obviously, but there's this other idea of like artistic expression, which one of the participants in my research mentioned, because one of a teenager who was doing a route setting workshop created this climb that was beautiful. It looked like a piece of art. It wasn't very functional. It was difficult to climb, but it was still beautiful. And I think that's also where art kind of comes into climbing, is because you have somebody who creates a climb, but then you have people who use the climb, and then it turns into something new because there's new data, or the climb is too easy, so then people take away holds and they play games on it. And so the climb becomes this like experience that people had together as opposed to just rocks on.
Yeah, so it's an active creativity that begins with the route setting, and this especially applies to sport climbing, as you say, outside or indoor climbing. But then there's that creativity in the climber that wants to understand what they can do. And so another point, I guess, is every body is different, every person is different. Some of us have longer reaches, some of us may be shorter, and so there are different ways that a creative climber can challenge themselves. So that photo, I'm just going to say, when I looked at it, Sophie, it almost looked like the young teenager had almost did as you said, a work of art, but it almost reminded me of like a jellyfish or something like
Yes.
that. And that's the other thing too. A lot of climbing routes have funny names, and so maybe I just gave one to that
Jellyfish.
jellyfish. But yeah, so now the other thing too is something that you also mentioned in your paper, which I think is part of your thesis idea of identity. But also this idea of identity and belonging. So you describe how there was the idea of having queer climbing nights, and why these gatherings suggest that community is not just a benefit of climbing, but also people who may not feel entirely comfortable in a conventional setting, of sporting environment, that they could find that when they had shared experiences or identities, that they could feel that the spaces were more welcoming. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so at the gym I worked at, Calgary Climbing Centre, Rocky Mountain, we had one of the supervisors who organized a queer climbing night, which was a night where people who self-identified as LGBTQ plus were able to come in and climb together in a space that made feel to them more supportive than being surrounded by various identities. I also know of a different staff member who created an Indigenous climbing night for anyone who identified as Indigenous. And then similarly in BoulderHouse Victoria, they've also done queer climbing nights there that have been quite successful for individuals. And I think it just gives them a place where they're able to climb with people that feel like they understand each other, and that they're not being judged for their various identities.
Yeah, and women climbing nights I've seen in mini gyms as
Yes.
well that might be more typical. But the other thing too, and I thought I should bring this up because you do actually have something about trust and mindfulness. That's a very big part of your research, and you're also interested in the idea, they call it now the state of flow.
Mhm.
Even Alex Honnold is famous for saying that, climbing is a sort of form of meditation. This is now being studied quite seriously. It does bring us back to some of your original comments about how people can deal with things like anxiety and challenges like that. And that's why there's a therapeutic climbing can be used as a sort of therapeutic tool or way for people to overcome challenges. Can you speak about that a bit?
So I think the two most important things for flow, the first being is that the amount of challenge needs to match the person's ability. So if we're going to use Alex Honnold as an example, he's an incredibly strong climber. He's able to achieve flow when he's free soloing. If we were to put Alex Honnold in an indoor gym, he probably wouldn't find it challenging enough to match his abilities, and he wouldn't be able to achieve that flow sense. The
Mm-hmm.
second thing about flow is it needs to be something that is like inherently enjoyable. You don't really notice time passing because you're so immersed in what you're doing.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that climbing helps create, because you have the danger aspect of it, which adds the challenge a little bit. But then you have to activate almost every single part of your body to do certain moves. You have to balance yourself with your core. You have to push up with your legs. You have to pull up with your hands. And then you also need to kind of activate your brain to think about, where am I going to put my body? Where am I going to, and then you're kind of also maybe talking yourself through it. But if you've reached flow, you're not really thinking about those things anymore, because you're just doing it.
Yeah. And it's hard to really describe for those, for people that are listening, how could you, being a climber yourself, actually describe, you said something about time stopping and time
Yes.
almost not existing. What do you actually feel, do you think? And I like what you said about challenge, because I think that that's important. The challenge that which in climbing terminology is sometimes often called a project. So you're working on a
Yes.
project. I really like how it sounds in French, le projet, like it's your little project that each climber may return to again and again. So I think maybe could you bring us into that state of flow just for a
Yeah.
minute?
I find often in my life, anyways, because I'm a master's student, I have a lot of things to do. So I'm constantly thinking, okay, this is what I'm going to get done today. This is what I need to do. And I recognize flow state when I go climbing and I kind of forget about the time. Like, I'm not thinking, okay, I need to finish this by this time and I need to do this by this time. I'm just there climbing. And it doesn't happen to me every time I climb, obviously,
Mhm.
because I'm not able to push myself every single time I go climbing. But when I am projecting or working on a climb that I really enjoy, or a climb that is challenging me in a way that is new, that is maybe more when the flow state comes out. And specifically, I think it's easier to achieve when you're outside because you're immersed in nature and it's also, I think, more challenging to climb outdoors because there's more hazards that you have to mitigate. So yeah, I would think that the flow state is particularly achievable when you go climb outside.
And I think that's an important point because outside you don't have you don't have the mats that you could land on, and potentially it's definitely more free spirited, and you have to deal with overhangs and rock and sharp rock, which could cause a few cuts and scrapes, and sometimes a few bangs, and so absolutely. Now. We've had a lengthy discussion. What do you feel is the value, Sophie, of this kind of research? I mean, it goes back to the initial question. It's not as studied as much as maybe some of the, more sort of analytical research that looks at maybe statistics and specifically people even like Alex Honnold are studied. What do you think the benefit of your research is, and some of the things we've talked about today?
I think it's that it's interdisciplinary. So I went from a psychology degree to kinesiology. I've enjoyed neuroscience, philosophy. I've worked at a hospital that was more rehabilitation focused. And I think that when different disciplines work together, you're able to accomplish more problems. So the way that this relates to this research is we have the World Health Organization defining health as something that is physical, social, and mental. And I would add spiritual, but that's a different conversation. And I think that climbing hits upon all of those points because it helps you with your physical health, through the aerobic activity that you're doing and building muscles. It helps you with your mental health because of the neuroplasticity that I talked about, flow that we discussed, this idea of self-efficacy, where you build belief in your ability to do a specific task. And then there's also the social part that we talked about. So your own social identity, but also your sense of belonging, community, and being able to make relationships with other people. And I also think that a lot of research is trying to figure out how do we deal with all of these chronic diseases? How do we deal with people's well-being? And I think that rock climbing is something that can help with various different problems that the world is facing today, but is also something that is attainable to a wide variety of people because there's so many different disciplines of climbing. You can go bouldering, you can go top rope climbing, you can go indoor climbing, you can do competitive climbing, you can do a multi-pitch. There's so many different things you can do. And if you want to get involved more as an instructor role, you can do that. Or if you want to go into route setting, there's lots of different ways that you can get involved in the climbing community.
One thing we have not mentioned, and it's funny because this is a big maybe deterrent for people that don't climb. And this is in all settings. And you did hint at fear of heights, but fear is something that climbers, people that may be prevented in actually climbing, is one factor. But also the fear continues to be there because that's an important aspect. And one of your themes in your paper is about emotional regulation and also how people deal with what you actually call the value of falling. So that failure, so people that climb know this, that they're going to fall. And there's a photo that you included in this article of a woman who is kind of midair where you can see she's falling. So, failure, you say, fosters resilience, patience, and problem-solving skills. But the failure is a very important part. But also the falling itself from the fear side is also important from a cognitive or a psychological side.
Yeah. I think climbing mimics life in that way because I don't know a single person who has achieved every single thing that they've wanted in their life at every single moment. You don't wake up every single day and have things go perfectly well. You're going to get injured. You're going to have conflict with the people in your life. You're going to fail an exam. You may fail your driver's test. You may get sick. Same thing with climbing. I don't know many people who have, or anyone who's been able to right away do every single climb that they wanted to do or who's never been injured. So that falling and being able to get back up again or getting injured and getting back into the sport is teaching you life skills because you're going to need those skills in your life, specifically like doing things that scare you, because I'm sure everyone has something that scares them. And it's important to be able to do some of the things that scare you.
Yeah. And so this was something you, I'm sure, must have come up with in the conversations that you had with these 9 individuals, right? And how, I'm just curious, how did some of them react to that, and how did they see these, what is almost sometimes to me, very climbing can feel almost like something we shouldn't be doing because it's many of us might be facing a 90 to 100 degree wall that could have an overhang,
Yes.
and we could be 60, 70 feet up in the air just on a tethered sort
Yes.
of rope. What is how do people explain that
Yes.
there is I'll be honest, there's a community of people that I'm sure think that climbers are a bit nutty. and,
Yes.
and
Yeah, I
yet
get that question all the time. Do you free solo? No. No, I don't.
but even the ones that are on a rope, we are often seen as being,
Mhm.
almost a little bit odd in their choices and their life choices. However, the climber is embracing that fear. Am I right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting you brought this up because I'm thinking about when I was trained to instruct climbing, we were told you're not allowed to use the word safe because
Right.
climbing is inherently dangerous. It's not safe. The things that you're teaching people when you're instructing climbing is how to manage the risks. So you're given skills as the climber and as the belayer, how to make sure your climber doesn't fall, how to position yourself in opposed to the rope so that you don't get tangled in it and flip upside down, when you should flip into the draws so that you don't ground fall, things like that. And also, I guess, picking, if you're going to go outside, what's the weather looking like? Has anyone been to the climbing spot recently that may know? You're basically learning these skills for how to manage your own safety. And like, yet again, coming back to life is also risky because you're going to go through it and you're going to get injured, you're going to get hurt, you're going to feel emotions, and you need to find ways to manage those. And I think that it's worth putting yourself in a little bit of risk so that you can learn to manage it. And the other thing is you get to choose how much risk you're comfortable with. So some
Mm-hmm.
people are comfortable with just free soloing without very many risk mitigation techniques. And some people like to have all of the risk mitigation techniques. And so it really gives that person the autonomy that they need to feel comfortable doing the activity.
Mm-hmm. And I think this will be my final question, Sophie, because it really does interest me. What do you think makes climbing unique? Specifically, let's say we take mountain sports, right? And I myself would probably feel that it's unlike anything that you can really compare it. It's some people, including myself, have a difficulty with even expressing what climbing actually is. And I think you've done an extraordinary job. But it is you. Do you think?
Yeah,
I mean, is that the right word, or do you see it
yeah,
as
I understand.
something that maybe because you've started younger doing it, is it just a
Well,
what
if I
is?
think of other mountain sports like skiing, for example, or mountain biking or hiking, it is similar with the exposure to the outdoors and challenging yourself. But I think the real difference with climbing is the connection. If you're thinking about rope climbing, like you need that other person to be there to get you to the top and you're working together. Obviously, you're working together on a hike as well to get to the top. But I think that climbing is different because of the way that it activates your brain and your body and the social dynamics that it creates.
And what about the actual physicality of the sport? Do you think anyone can climb?
I think that anyone can climb. I don't think anyone can climb a specific climb, right? Because
Yes.
all climbs have different grades. But I think that the biggest thing that holds people back is the belief that they're not a climber and that they're not able to do it, which kind of ties back to my thesis again, because we're trying to get people to believe that this is who I am. I am a rock climber, so I'm going to rock climb. So people may think, well, I'm not a rock climber, so I'm not going to rock climb because it's going to be
Mm-hmm.
too hard. But
Mm-hmm.
if you do half of a climb and it's the easiest climb in the gym, who says you're not a rock climber? You just went rock climbing.
Wow, I love that. I think that's a beautiful way to end. Thank you so much for this. This was a really
Yeah.
special interview, Sophie. I want you to know that.
Well,
Thanks
thanks for giving me the
again.
opportunity to speak about my passion. I appreciate that. And I hope that other people, they resonate with the conversation we've had.
Thanks so much. I have been speaking with Sophie Alexander, a master's student in kinesiology at the University of Victoria, whose research examines climbing, physical activity, identity development, and the importance of social connection and belonging. This was part one of a two-part series exploring rock climbing and its relationship with physical and psychological well-being. Next week in part two, I'll be speaking with Dr. Patrick Boudreau, a postdoctoral fellow at Concordia University and a behavioral medicine researcher with a background in health and exercise psychology. If you would like to hear today's conversation again, this episode will be available through CITR at citr.ca, as well as on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. A full transcript of this interview, along with links to Sophie's research and some of the subjects we discussed, will also be available on my blog at thehourisblue.com. I am your host, Farah Guerrero. Thank you for listening.